Hi, everyone. I just wanted to revisit the idea of monophyletic groups. There was some uncertainty as people were doing their lab exercise for this week, and we got an exam coming up, so I wanted to review this. Just make sure everybody's clear on it. I might have not covered this in as much detail as I should have. So this is the tree of species that we had in lab for family Oroboncaceae. And for the most part, these are monophyletic genera. So genus is a category. We covered this in class. We kind of showed some examples about monophyletic genera. I don't know if I really pushed you to understand when something was or was not monophyletic. So let's see some examples. First off, I want to go in and just kind of view this idea of common ancestor. So you can take any two species and they have what's called a most recent common ancestor. So we have this big genus here, Pedicularis. I can just grab a couple, Pedicularis resupinata, and let's do Pedicularis pyrenaica. So the term that's often used is most recent common ancestor. And so that basically means that they have a common ancestor farther back, but their most recent common ancestor is the one that's specific to them and separates out the most other species that wouldn't belong to that ancestor. And the simple way to find that most recent common ancestor is to trace some lines. So I'm going to follow back on the phylogeny until sort of like taking directions. Let's say you were in a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of streets going into it. We get back to here, and at that position, I can meet up with the line that comes from this other species. So that's the most recent common ancestor. That's the closest toward the present, the right hand of this image, the closest toward the present ancestor that still gave rise to these two species. So right here is their common ancestor. Now, for these two species, it might not be all that important to us. But on a bigger scale, we often like to classify groups, right? So we need to classify a genus that has a single common ancestor that's specific to them and not specific to any other genus. That makes them monophyletic. So I've got this phylogeny arranged so that it's so-called ladderized, so things are branching off. Closer to the bottom, the first branches branch off and head to places closer to the bottom of the image, and then we get this kind of ladder sort of look to it, or steps maybe. So I'm going to just zoom down and highlight this species, which looks like it is, well, I've got some experience looking at these. This is the species that's most distantly related to everything else on the tree. So any other species in Pedicularis, I'll try to zoom through here and find a common ancestor. Any other species in Pedicularis would have to have a common ancestor with that species. And to connect those two with this line that's straight and not squiggled, I had to go all the way back here. So that's the most recent common ancestor of the genus Pedicularis. And now the question is, are they monophyletic? So we have this ancestor. For them to be monophyletic, the ancestor would have to give rise to only species in the genus Pedicularis, and not, we wouldn't have any Pedicularis species located outside of this clade. So sometimes those happen because you have species that look alike, or classification has been difficult in the past. And this criterion of groups being monophyletic is important, kind of a new one for us to use these days, you know, in the last 50 years. So this is a monophyletic group. We have one ancestor and everybody descended from that is called Pedicularis. Some people get thrown by these species that are the only representative of their genus. Let's get us a new color here. Orange sounds good. So Lamoruia rhananthifolia is the only representative of that genus shown on the tree. If you have just a single member, that is really by default, it's already monophyletic. So it's mono for one, it's one instance of itself. We do have one problem on this tree. So if you haven't figured it out for yourself, here comes the answer for you. There's one genus on this tree that's not monophyletic. And this one here, it's this one, Seimeria. So we have two members of Seimeria. They're in a genus, and that genus is a category. And as we use our criteria these days, the category should be monophyletic. So let's find their common ancestor, dot, 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 here. For them to be monophyletic, then everything descended from that most recent common ancestor would have to have the genus category name Seimeria. And as it's shown here, we have another member of a different genus, Aureolaria, and that makes this group. This is a clade, but it's got, basically the problem name is Seimeria. So you could either change the name of this species and make that Seimeria pedicularia, and that would give you a monophyletic Seimeria genus. Or sometimes people will assign one of these other species to a different category. So you might end up with 3 genus names. This is all dependent on what the plants look like. It's dependent on how much we trust our phylogeny. It's dependent on a little bit of preference on the author. Sometimes if you've discovered a new relationship, you are the person who gets to jump in there and offer what the relationship should be, how things should be named. Anyway, so that one would have to be resolved if we really trusted this tree, and I don't know where things are these days. I grabbed this tree a while back, so who knows what the current understanding, current classification of these species is. I guess while I'm here, I'll just highlight the other genera. These are all monophyletic. So this is the clade of the genus Agellinus, common ancestor back here. Get into a different color. Let's go green. Castellea has a common ancestor here. Oops, I'm sorry. Stuck around too long. Castellea has an ancestor there, is their common ancestor. So genera that are big, small, doesn't really matter. They can still have a single most recent common ancestor and be monophyletic. Parantocelia, Euphrasia, Lathria, Rhinanthus, and finally Melampyrum. All right, so those are all monophyletic for the same reasons as we used in this big genus Pedicularis. And hopefully that's a little more clear for you now.